Okay, my name is Michael Coveney, as it says on the slide here. I'm the person who's going to entertain you for the next half or hour or so. I do want to say that I've been involved in planning, consolidation reporting all my career. I started in 1974 with a software company. I was very young at the time. I was one of these child prodigies, so I'm not really that old. And I started out actually by helping organisations like British Gas and ICI and British Steel, as they were then, and the National Coal Board. They were still around in those days. And my job was to go along and help organisations plan, budget and report. And in those days, we did it by something called timesharing. Anybody remember computer timesharing? Great. That just puts the age on everybody then. Somebody there's going to admit to it. Basically, there was a central computer system, and people would dial in that computer system, and then they would use an application, and then they would submit their budget and do a consolidation. And roll forward 40 years, we're doing exactly the same thing now, except we call it the internet, and we call it cloud computing. So nothing ever really changes. And through that time, I used to go and ask organisations, what do you want to plan? What do you want to budget? And I must admit, for the first part of my career, I used to say, okay, you want to plan that, fine. And I used to write it down, I'd write the programs. But something started to nag me in my head. And I used to start thinking, hold on a minute, why the hell are they doing that anyway? Still, maybe they're brighter than I am, and they're doing something for some reason, I'm not quite sure what it was. But something that I learnt, and that's if an organisation has a bad and broken planning process, when you implement new technology to it, you end up with a bad and broken planning process. You see, it's not usually the technology that's broke. It's usually the process and the way you go around planning. Now, I met Kiritz probably early 1990s, something like that, when he was just a child.
That's right.
Same as me, he was one of those other child people. And
Larry to give up our head on the show.
and Kirit and I always had the same philosophy. It's not about the tool. When we go and help organisations, it's about how do we improve the business process that they have. And the technology is just an enabler. That's all it is. Now, there are technologies that will get you into trouble if you use them. But today, most technologies are pretty good, and SAP at BPC is a great technology, don't want to damn cry it, but it's how you come to use it. And so, what I want to do over the next 45 minutes or so, I want to talk about how do you leave a technology like BPC that you've already invested in. Because like a car, if you've just bought a car to travel to work, it can do more than take you to work. So I want to give you some ideas and some thoughts on how you could actually take that technology and use it for other things within your organisation. And the way I'm going to do that, I'm going to start off by looking at, let's have a look at how traditionally people plan and budget. I know this doesn't include you, but let's have a laugh at some of the things that organisations do, some of the crazy things they do. We're going to challenge those, and then we're going to rethink, how should an organisation plan? I'm sure you exhibit many of these best practices I'm going to cover here in this session, and then we'll take a quick look at the role of technology in supporting this. Okay, the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to introduce you first of all to my grandson. This is William. He was 4 years old when I took this photo, actually earlier in the year. And William and me, according to him, we are best buddies. He said to me, you're my bestest friend ever. Fantastic. Now, of course, I'm a cool guy, but the thing that did it was actually a couple of years ago when we were out shopping. I was with my wife and with my daughter. We were going to yet another dress shop. And I said to William, come on, William, let's get out of here. Because across the road was a tool shop. Quite a big tool shop. And I thought, let's go across there. And William got there and he went, wow! In fact, we walked into this tool shop and there the walls were covered with big, drills and chainsaws and angle grinders. And he went, wow! Like this, as though in Aladdin's cave. Now, there is a point to this story, all right? So just bear with me for the moment. And I guess it's a guy thing, isn't it? Us guys, we like our power tools, don't we? Is that right? You just, come on, I'm not the only one, sure. We go in a shop and, we don't want just any drill, we want a hammer drill. We want a hammer drill with a 500 watt motor. The bigger the motor, the better. Even if all we're going to do is drill through some plasterboard, we want a big drill, a man's drill. And we actually bought this angle grinder earlier this year. And as you can see, I actually restore old motorbikes. And I'd spent a day trying to take the paint off a tank with wire brushes. And you know, at the end of the day, I thought, you know what, I've spent all day and I've hardly touched the tank. I need myself a power tool. So off down to the shop and I bought this angle grinder. Fantastic. Has anybody here got an angle grinder? Someone, they're great, aren't they? Guys, get yourself an angle grinder, all right? So I've got this angle grinder, put an abrasive disc on it, up to the tank. 10 seconds, the paint's off the tank. Oh, fantastic. Another 10 seconds, and the tank is bright, shiny metal. Bang! Straight through the tank. Oh, good grief. And something that I remembered is this, it's not so much about the tool, it's how you use it. And the same thing happens with technology. SAP BBC, let me get that technology. Let me get HANA. I'm going to go for big data, not small data, big data. And so we get these technologies and we throw them at the data, but we forget it's not about the tool. It's about how you use them. And I find something very interesting is this. Given that back in the 1970s, I was selling and implementing planning systems with the latest technology, we find today, this according to a recent survey, that most organisations, only around 50 to 60% of the value in a strategic plan is ever delivered to the organisation. Now, it's not because there's anything wrong with the plan, but it turns out, look at this, the number one reason why organisations fail to implement their plans is because of inadequate or unavailable resources. What the hell is budgeting about? Surely budgeting is about making sure there is adequate resources around. We spend 4 months a year getting the budget ready, and for some reason it's out of date within the first month. Why is that? The trouble is that most planning that takes place inside an organisation is really nothing short of a guessing game. You know, it starts out at the start of the year, senior manager have a set of numbers they want the rest of the organisation to guess. And so we implement something like SAP BPC, we hand out the spreadsheets and say, see if you can guess my numbers. So there you are, you type the numbers in for next year, we add them up, and senior managers go, nope, they don't match. Wrong guess. See if you can guess again. So we call this budget pass 2. Right, now what happens in our mentality, we're thinking, I wonder what set of numbers they've got. Let me see if I can guess them. So we guess them again, nope. And of course we go through this process a couple of times, and then what happens is that somebody does a top-down budget process on us. Oh, that was the set of numbers. And do you know what, I love top-down budgeting. Always loved it, because I've now got a set of numbers that are no longer my numbers. I've got every reason to miss them. And you see, we do strange things. So why is that? I think one of the things that we have to be aware of is that there's this thing called budgetary control. It is the number one management framework in use inside organisations today. In other words, the way that we tend to manage the company is through a thing called budgeting, whereby we hand out. Now, the reason why I put this up on the screen is that the whole concept of annual budgets, quarterly forecasts, monthly reporting was all well established in the 1920s. By the way, this is one of my old motorbikes. It's nearly 100 years old. It was around when budgetary control came out. Now, if you expect me to ride here around the M25 on that bike, you're going to say you're mad. But you know, it was the latest in technology when this was produced. And the trouble is that budgetary control no longer makes sense. And let me explain why that is. If you look at the changing business landscape in which we operate, there are 3 things that are happening. First of all, the business landscape, the speed of business, I call it, is getting faster. In other words, for an organisation to get established in a new market, to promote its product, to then start attracting customers, in the past used to take years because the technologies available was newspaper advertising. You've got to put an office in place. You've got to put a phone system in place. But we all know today that with the advent of the internet, that is no longer true. You can set up a virtual business, you can start to promote it to all around the world within weeks. And so what we found is that the speed of business has changed significantly. The second thing that's changed is what I call the complexity of business. You know, what we're finding now is that quite often in a big manufacturer, you're now manufacturing for a customer of one. So we are told that if you buy a Mercedes or a BMW, you order it in the showroom, and then basically the manufacturer makes your model just for you. I'm not sure if that's true, by the way, but that's what we're told. But not only that, things have got complex because we've now got things like social media. Isn't it interesting how our business model can be destroyed because someone puts a comment on a social media site like, you didn't pay tax, or you're making your products in the sweatshops of India, or something like that. And you know, in some ways it has nothing to do with our business model, but suddenly overnight our marketplace is gone. All right? And so the business area has got extremely complex. And as a result of that, the planning time horizon, in other words, how far forward can we accurately predict what's going to happen, is now shortening. It's interesting that with budgeting, typically starts 3 to 4 months before the end of the current year. We're now trying to guess events that are 15 months out. I don't know about you, but in the kind of businesses that I operate in, it's hard enough predicting the events 6 months out. So what's the point of trying to guess numbers 15 months out when we know they're probably not realistic anymore? No, what we've done, we've actually just come up with a guessing game. And when I talk to organisations about this, they say, John Michael, you're absolutely right. There's no point in setting detailed budgets 15 months out. So why do we do it? Well, I don't know. Because we do. Yes, but why? Well, I don't know. We did it last year, so we better do it again this year. And I think part of the problem is that people don't know what to replace it with. So, what's happened, of course, over time is that there's been a whole series of management methodologies that have tried to cope with the speed and complexity of business. You've probably all heard of the quality movement, very famous with Toyota and the Japanese companies in the 1960s and 70s. Then there came management by objectives. I'm not sure if I've got the timing of these right. Balanced scorecard. By the way, who here uses the balanced scorecard in the organisation? Any hands? 2? Okay. Hands up if you don't use a balanced scorecard. Okay, I now understand who's putting their hands up and who isn't. But gives me a bit of context there. Interestingly about the balanced scorecard, it's still considered to be one of the most modern management methodologies, and yet it was again written over 20 years ago before the advent of the internet and e-commerce. Really interesting in terms of that. And of course at the same time is that the technology companies have been coming up with new technologies. Again, when Kurt and I started our lives in Timeshare, you know, we were just about entering, well, we still had multi-user planning systems, but they just focused, if you like, just on budgeting and nothing else. And then, of course, along came OLAP analysis, slice and dice, rotate, all these great technologies, then dashboards, and all this other stuff has been coming along, all trying to deal with this problem. But to my mind, there are 4 basic problems that organisations face today. Let's have a look at what these are. The first one, I've already mentioned it, it's the planning horizon. Why do we budget 12 months ahead when we know we can't predict that far ahead anyway? Now, of course, you have to give people guidance. You've got to let investors know where you're heading, but is there any point in doing a detailed budget when we know that the figures are probably not going to be right anyway? Interesting, I believe that the current traditional processes of annual planning, monthly reporting, quarterly forecasting, are just out of line with today's business environment. So we have to replace it with something else. And so we'll look at that in a moment. The second issue that we have is the budget is still one of the main tools we use to manage performance. So, by the way, here's a budget. Okay, we've got revenue across the top, we've got expenses down the side. Is that a good budget? Well, I don't know. The trouble is that if this was a guessing game, we've probably got a good guess, but has it got anything to do with strategy in this particular budget? I love this. I'll give you some books at the end to read if you want to. There's this great book actually called Best Practices in Planning and Performance Management by David Axon. It's actually a book of facts based on the study of 2,500 organisations over something like a 15, 16-year period. And it's an up-to-date study. And every so often, they have a look at what are the best practices. But they had this quote, look, it's not unusual for a company to develop a budget item for spending on photocopier paper in the third quarter of next year, but have little or no idea how much it expects to generate for its 10 best customers. And I think part of the problem is that we base budgeting around the chart of accounts. Have you ever wondered why we do that? Back in the early 1990s, I was responsible for a new product, a new planning product. And one of our first customers was actually in the City of London. It was an insurance company. And good old Clive Swift. Good old Clive. He was one of our first customers. And one day, he phoned me up and he said, Michael, he says, the budget spreadsheet, he said, it's taking 3 minutes to open up. Can you come and fix it? And I thought, yeah, okay, sure. So I got on my motorbike, bombed over to the city, and I said to Clive, okay, Clive, open up your budget spreadsheet. And Clive opened up the mother of all spreadsheets. It had 1,800 accounts down the left-hand side. It had 36 time periods. And I'm calculating the number of numbers that someone's going to have to enter. By the way, I'm impressed it opens it up in 3 minutes. And I said to Clive, Clive, what the hell is this? And he goes, it's my budget. And I asked those same questions. Clive, why do you budget? Well, what do you mean? Clive, why do you budget? Well, we always budget. Yeah, Clive, why? What's the purpose? Well, we did it last year. And Clive was unable to tell me why they budgeted. Now, if he had given me the answer, the reason why we budget is so that I can put a number against every chart of account in the general ledger, I would have said, perfect, that's exactly what you got. But if he had said to me, the reason why we budget is so that we can implement our strategic plan, I would have said, you've gotta be joking. I can't work out what the strategic plan is from this spreadsheet. And if I can't work it out, no one else can either. The third issue that we have is actually to do with the reports we give people. Now, I'm always asked to produce this report. Actual budget variance per month, actual budget variance year to date, with a comparison with last year. I'm not saying about the demo or anything like that earlier on, but I say to people, this is the worst. This is the absolute worst report you could give to anybody to manage performance. Now, some of you are thinking, if only I could produce that report, I would be all right. No, you won't. It's a dreadful report. And what's more, you know it's a dreadful report. Okay, can anybody see, remember, I'm managing performance, can anybody see what's wrong with this report? Anybody want to put their hands up? No? You're just all too shy. Okay, look at this. I notice that for the month, I'm £500 over on revenue. Isn't that good? Yes, but why am I £500 over? And somebody says, what you need is drill down. Fantastic. So I drill down, I look at all the products and all the customers, I find it's one customer, one product, that's 500 over. Still doesn't tell me why. And look, if I'm going to manage performance, I notice that year to date, I'm 5,000 behind. I want to know, what are you going to do between now and the end of the year to get us back on track? And somebody will usually say, well, we're going to sell more. As if we haven't been trying to sell more all year. What are you going to do? You see, this report has 5 fundamental problems. First of all, it shows no relationship to the activities that took place that generated these results. 2, has no information about what needs to happen in the future to bring it back on track. 3, it's an accounting-based view of the world and not necessarily the one that we all live in. 4, you have no way of knowing what's going on in the real world. You know, I could be over on budget, but if the budget was a guessing game, I'm better than my guest. Jack Welch said that organisations, they don't want to beat the budget, they want to beat the competition. That's who the target is. And look at, lastly, I have no way of knowing if my strategy is successful. So, if I said I was going to grow by being nice to customers, I have no idea if I was nice to customers, and 2, I have no idea if being nice actually generated that result. So somebody will say, what you need is a scorecard. Fantastic. So there we go, there's the scorecard. This actually is a screenshot of a real scorecard, but it's a quarter of it. And I'm looking, good grief. Do you know, it has the same problems. Customer satisfaction has gone red. Why? And what do I need to do between now and the future to bring it back? And how much did it cost us? You see, there's no context with this. Finally, the 4th thing is that we end up with all these data silos everywhere. You know, there's a silo, if like, of transactions that come out of the general ledger. We might have a reporting model that's got the statutory accounts in. We might have another model that has a BI analysis. The thing is that they're all discrete. And the trouble is that if we start to make decisions just by looking at one of them, we're going to end up with the wrong decisions. So how can we bring this together? And I've been working on a concept for a couple of years now. It's something which I call a planning framework. But to introduce it, let me come back to the fundamentals of management. This is Management 101, which I know you all know anyway. Now, think about the Olympics last year. How was performance measured? How did we measure? What gold medals? World records? Something like that? Yep. And so that's how we measure performance. It's to do with outcomes. Now, if you were in charge, let's say I'm going to put you in charge of the Olympic team for 4 years from now for Rio. How are you going to manage performance? Come on, there must be some budding people here. How would you manage performance? Don't look at you. Okay, that's a start, I guess, right? How about you? How would you manage performance?
Invest now for the future.
Invest now? That sounds like a really vague, great thing. Well, let's have a look. I know you know this. Look, it involves, by the way, perhaps you've got to set some objectives. What do we think we can achieve as a team? Then we need to make sure we allocate the right resources to the right activities. The training programs. Got to make sure we recruit the right coaches. And then as we start those training programs, we've got to make sure that those activities are carried out. There's no point having a performance centre if it's not being used. And then we've got to set some milestones to make sure that the athletes are building up their strength in time. We've got to monitor whether they're driving the right outcomes. We've got to make sure that they're delivering value for money. Because if one set of activities is costing all the budget, then hold on, is this a wise use? And then finally, those activities aren't working, do you know what? Let's get rid of them. Let's replace them with something else. So you see, this is a continuous exercise, and if I can rephrase this in terms of organisations and managing performance, it's first of all understanding your current business model. How do you currently act? Secondly, how do you then improve that business model? Thirdly, it's about assigning resources to the improvement of the business model while making sure it still runs. And finally, checking that it's working. Okay, so I have this thing which I call a planning framework, and there are 4 things to it. And in the last sort of 25 minutes that I've got, I want to give you some ideas and some thoughts. Unfortunately, because of my time, I can only operate at a high level. But I do usually go into a lot of detail on some of this. And I have a book coming out later this year called Planning Frameworks, which is all detailed in wood. But basically, there are 4 areas I would suggest that you look at using something like SAP BBC to, if like, help you in terms of management. And the 4 areas are these. The first area is using technology to understand what I call your business as usual. How do you currently operate? Secondly, the second area is about strategy. See, strategy is about how are we going to improve the current business model. We'll take a look at that. The fourth, or third area rather, is the management processes. How do you manage the activities within business as usual and within the strategy improvement? How do you manage that? And lastly, we're going to take a look at how do you then report and analyze this in the context of actually implementing strategy. Okay, are you ready for this? Yeah? Bit of excitement? Woo! Okay, I know it's leading up to lunch. All right, let's take the first one. I'm going to skip that just a moment. I'll come back to that one. Inside every organisation are a series of what I call value-add activities. Most organisations have between 3 and 7 sets of activities that they do that actually adds value to the business. Here, I've just come up with a couple. So, for example, in a manufacturing environment, as we started there this morning, you know, there's a sales set of activities. I'm sure SAP have a sales set of activities. It's the way in which they generate revenue through marketing programs, lead qualification, sales meetings, and so on. I'm not saying that these are the right activities, but for your organisation, there must be a series of core activities that you do in order to maintain your business. For example, there's a production set of activities to turn the raw materials into finished goods and then ship them off. There's probably a research or product development set of activities. Even if you're a not-for-profit company, there'll be a set of activities to keep yourself relevant to the customers you're serving, and so on. And underneath this are a series of support activities that enable the above to happen. Now, when I go into an organisation, if it's a manufacturer, normally they will have a recipe, a very clear recipe that everybody understands of how it is they transform raw materials into finished goods. But if I ask them, well, tell me, what are the activities whereby you as an organisation operate to turn those materials into products you can sell? It's a bit vague. Oh, that's marketing. Oh, that's product development. And we split this up. And we haven't actually gone down and itemised this. Now, as a result of this, I believe, well, let me just go back up one. Oh, can I go back? There we go. I believe there are a series of models that you can develop. The key one, which I'm going to go into in a little bit more detail in a moment, is what I call the operational activity model. And this model describes the value that goes on inside your organisation. And we'll come back to that in a moment. There are a series of supporting models, and these models are typically optimization models. So, for example, if you're a production manufacturer, you'll have a production optimization capability. In other words, you'll look at the sales forecast, you look at what raw materials you've got coming in, and work out what is the best, what should be manufactured when, and so on. Now, out of these, you can then develop a cash forecast model. So by knowing what it is you're going to produce and what you're going to spend, based on the payment terms of customers and suppliers, you can then generate a cash forecast, and from that you know what your funding is. Because funding is usually about cash. Okay, so how is funding? And so I believe that organisations will have a network of models that describes value and then how that's going to be funded. Let's just move on. Let me go back to this activity model. Okay, so for these activities, we typically assign them to individual departments. It's their role is responsible for different activities. And there's actually 3 sets of measures at least you could have to model this. The first one is the measure of, let's have a look, measure of activity. So if it's my job, I'm part of the marketing department and I need to market, then I can actually measure my activity. My activity might be, for example, the number of mail shots I make and so on. Now, out of that activity, there's also now a measure of success. How do I know if I'm being successful as the marketing department? Well, it could be the response rate that I get. Let's keep this very simple. So, a measure of activity is the number of mail shots. The success is the response rate. And the third thing I can measure is how much resource does it consume. Now, there's a really good reason for doing this. You can end up almost with a budget or a plan that breaks these down if you can. Now, I'm not talking about activity-based costing. I am talking about activity-based management. Because in the end, the only thing managers can ever manage are the activities that go inside an organisation. Now, to begin with, you might do this at a very high level and just say, well, I'm just going to monitor sales. But look at this. We're monitoring levels of success, we're looking at measures of activity, and we're then looking at measures of resource. And I'm sure you're jumping ahead here. Hold on. I can say, is this worth it? Is this cost worth it, considering what we're getting and the success we're getting? Maybe some of these activities I could outsource to somebody else. But you see, if all I'm going to do is measure this, that gives me very little information. I need to be measuring all of this so I can make an informed decision. That's the first component. Second component is what I call the strategy improvement. In my experience, all strategies are improvement. Now, there are lots of methodologies that you can adopt, whether it be the balanced scorecard, performance prism, Hoshin planning. There's 101 out there. They all have something in common, and that is strategy is all about setting a high-level objective, and then it's coming up with ways. How am I going to achieve that? What is the way that we're going to operate in order to achieve that, for example, increase in sales? What is the strategy? Well, launch a new product, maybe go to a new marketplace. A strategy, by the way, in my terminology, is a high-level description of direction. Out of that, we can then come up with the detailed action plans or initiatives. What physical activities are we going to do in order to implement the strategy to achieve the goals? From which we can then make assumptions, because it's important to measure assumptions about any target. For example, we might assume the marketplace is growing at 5%. If that turns out to be wrong, that means all our targets are probably wrong as well. And then finally, right down to the resources and so on. And get it in. If you want to copy these slides, I could send you these, so you've got more detail behind them. Okay, so what happens? And again, I've just expressed this strategy as a strategy map. I find these really useful to display to people. So, for example, here are my objectives. Here are the themes, because I'm using balanced scorecard terminology here. Then here are my initiatives. And these are focused onto different parts of the organizational activity model. Let's just do that. And I think from a modeling point of view, I think the kind of model you should be looking for this is, first of all, to have a model whereby you can capture proposals from people around the organization. I did some work with Rolls-Royce, that's the car people, and the CFO there, his role, he said that we actually say to anybody in the organisation, they can all come up with ideas and initiatives, they can propose them, of how we can either improve revenue or reduce costs. That's what they're about. And so and now these projects are fully detailed. They're like mini plans. They have people responsibility, when they start, when they end, what resources they consumed, what activities will be involved, and so on. Now, these go in. Now, you can't do everything that gets proposed. So the idea is that every so often, you evaluate the combinations of initiatives. Say, which ones could we do? Where are our problems? And depending on that, you then say, okay, we're going to go with these three. They now become the live initiatives. And with Rolls-Royce, they make the person who proposed it now responsible. And what's more, they are now paid on the success of the initiative. Not on how much resources it consumes, but on the success. And now I've got initiatives. And by the way, I now need to add this to business as usual. So high-performing companies separate budgets into business as usual, strategic initiatives. That way they can ensure there's always adequate funding for strategy. And of course, by aggregating them, we then get the total business of the company. Okay, by the way, this is a different looking budget spreadsheet, isn't it? So here, by the way, I've got my revenue, I've got my P&L detail, but at the top, I've got what the goals are, And across the time, I've actually got the strategic initiatives. So here I can see the baseline, or business as usual, with the initiatives going across the side. So from a technical, this is actually another dimension inside the model. Okay, so that's the second one. 2 more to go. I'm on track. Okay, so let's have a look at the management processes. One of the things that I smile when Gartner does something like this is they seem to think that management processes can be categorized into 6. Strategic planning, where do you want to go? Tactical planning, how are we going to get there? Financial planning, have we got enough resources to get there? Forecasting, where are we heading now? Management reporting, are we on track? And some kind of risk management. This, in some ways, is farcical. It doesn't operate like this. Let's have a look at a different picture. And this is my picture of performance. So, organizations, what they would typically do, they will have management activities that, first of all, analyze the current performance of the company. What are we good at? What are we weak at? How do we compare with competitors? What's the marketplace doing? Where's it going? And depending on that, they might come up with some high-level goals. We think we can capture a 20% share of the market, which equates to this amount in revenue. But they need to come up with, so how are we going to achieve those goals? What are the overarching strategies? Well, we've got to start being nice to customers. Okay, so nice to customers is a strategy. Once we have that, the next stage is what I call tactical planning. Tactical planning is, okay, what initiatives do we want to implement that strategy? What resources do those initiatives need? And then assess which combinations, as I was mentioning last time around. And then we go ahead with a plan. By the way, high-performing companies always have plan 2. They always have plan B up their sleeves, in case this plan doesn't work. Once we have that high-level plan, we can then go to detailed resource allocation, or budgeting. In other words, what the base budget is, initiative budget, any kind of funding we need for this. Then we kick off the projects. Then, of course, once the project is kicked off, we now need to forecast. How are we doing on revenue? What's the forecast on cost? But let's have a look at the status of those initiatives. Are they being implemented? Is business as usual delivering the results we expected? From this, of course, we then need to report that information back to management. And finally, perhaps some kind of risk analysis on this. What's happening in the marketplace? Has the competitors introduced a new product? Let's say they've cut the price in half. That's going to affect us. And of course, depending on that, we then send that back. Now, how often should we do this? How often should you do this? Well, actually, let me ask you the first question. Which one of these steps can you miss out? Can we miss out, let's say, development initiatives? Let's miss that one out. Well, no, that's crazy. You can't miss that one out. Okay, well, let's miss the baseline budget. No, you can't miss that. Let's miss the analyzed market. No, you can't miss any of them out. They're all required. And what's more, they're required as a single process. And that's why I find strange why some companies, not with SAP, why do they sell different products for this? It's part of the same process. This is crazy. Now, of course, within each activity, there are a series of other activities that take place. So just taking the budget process, there's a whole series of activities that need to be coordinated. And so I'll ask this question again. How often should we do this? Who's going to vote for once a year? Because you're not going to answer that question, because I've already said it was crazy just doing it once a year. By the way, there's this fantastic quote. I just love this one. Dakota tribal wisdom says that when you discover you're on a dead horse, the best strategy is to dismount. Of course, there are other strategies. You can change riders. You can get a committee to study the dead horse. You can benchmark how other companies use dead horses. You can declare that it's cheaper to feed a dead horse. You can harness them, several of them together. But when you've tried all these things, you're going to have to dismount. Isn't that true with businesses? If something's not working, let's stop it. And yet, I meet some organisations say, no, we've got to wait till the end of the year. I say, why? Well, because it's in the budget. Yeah? Well, you can't change the budget. Why not? It doesn't make sense. The problem is that given it's taken them 4 months to do the budget, they're thinking, we can't afford to do this every month. Now, there's some great information about how high-performing companies do this, and unfortunately, I just don't have time to do this. But basically, the top companies make this a continuous process. And it's triggered by events and exceptions, as well as the data on the calendar. And in the slides, I just had some information, is that when you come up, by the way, it's worth just going back and writing down your management process. What is it? How do you develop strategy and implement it? What are these activities involved? From this, you can start to determine the data requirements that you need to do those different activities. And then you can start to work out, how do we trigger these? Now, there'll be a number of information you can collect. So, for example, for one of these processes to start, what input do I need? What departments are involved? What do they need to accomplish in order to do that task? What output do we want from them? And so on. And so basically, you can write that down, but then the next trick is to say, how do we then start to trigger these individually? For example, if a competitor comes up with a new product that undercuts yours fantastically, do you know what? Something needs to change. And so what you'll find is that maybe we need to kick off. And so one of the things to think about is don't ever think about this as an annual process that's triggered by data and calendar. Think about how else could we trigger the different parts of the process depending on event exceptions. What things put the fear of God into you as an organisation? Because guess what? Better we start tracking those and then determine how we then trigger the replanning process. Okay, which brings us to the last one then. Let's have a look at reports and analyses. Reporting is about taking data from all these different components of the, what I call my planning framework, and presenting them in context. By the way, here's some suggestions of the kinds of reports you want to produce. First of all, I'll put them down as backward-looking. Backward-looking, internal focus. Did we achieve the objectives? Are the initiatives being implemented? How do they rank in terms of their impact on corporate goals? External. How are we doing against the competitors? Were our assumptions, for example, about the business environment correct? Because if they're not, then maybe the targets we're achieving aren't necessarily good ones. But here are the ones that are the really interesting ones, forward-looking ones. What trends are we seeing in our performance that could impact our overall objectives? Are we on course to achieve them? And I'm sure you can take these questions and write down what that means for you as an organisation. And so if you're involved in planning and reporting, why not come up with a set of really interesting, insightful questions and then try and work out what data you need. Quite often, we do reports based on the data we have. I've never thought that's a good idea. Let's do reports based on what we actually need to manage the business. And if we haven't got that data, let's work out how we're going to get it. For example, when I was at Timeshare, many years ago now, I was put in charge of profitability, actually of competition. We reckoned we should win 50% of the deals. And so my measurement, by the way, was making sure that we beat the competition. But we had no information on who we were competing with around the world. We worked out that would cost us £1 million to put a system in place. But we did it because for every 1% I went over, we put £1 million on the bottom line. And so it's very interesting. We dictated, if you like, our BI strategy by what was going to add value to the bottom line. And it's by answering these questions, because that tells you what systems you need to look out for. External focus, and so on, you can see that stuff. Okay, coming into land now. Let's have a quick look at a report. So I'm going to show you what the value of combining like operational data with financial data is. Look, here I've got a strategy, maintain the base, in other words, maintain customer relationships. And here I'm going to measure it by the number of customers we retain. So I'm going to set this up a target of 95. And I've said the way that we're going to retain customers is by 3 initiatives. One is a communication program to customers. And I'm going to measure, by the way, the activity there by running a conference like this, or like in Ireland. and by running a loyalty program. And I've set myself targets for these, and I've set a weight. And that weight says, I believe that this activity is more important than that activity. Now, look at the results. We actually attained 96%, and look, we didn't quite implement these plans. What does this report tell you about performance? Nobody wants to answer. Well, you can say, well, hold on a minute. It means, look, you didn't do this very well. Yeah, but look, the target, we achieved the target. Now, you're always going to get these obscure answers. But when I've done these reports, there's now an interesting debate that takes place in management. For example, maybe this target is too low. Maybe we don't have to do any more activities. But this isn't scientific. You can't really get any cause and effect relationships from this. But at least you can have an intelligent debate about it. But here are the things you can measure. So let's have a look at outcome. So we achieved 101% of the outcome, and we implemented 91%, and so on, of the activities. And I can then apply that outcome using the weight and say, look, I did 89% of the activities, you got 101% of the target. Again, it's not scientific, but at least you can now have a debate about this. And what you can do, if somebody comes up with another program to improve the base, why do we need it? It's, we're already doing quite well. So it's there. But look, let me add some other information. Here's a budget that we assigned.
Is it also possible that you deliberately put your targets for the tactics higher so that even if you don't meet it fully, you still meet your overall objective? Is that also possible?
That could be possible, and actually there's something I wasn't going to mention today, but I think if you pay people on the budget, you will get the budget you pay for, which is all about setting your bonus plan. Nothing to do with strategy. I absolutely agree. You've got to pay people, by the way, on targets, the high level objectives, and their activities. So for example, in Timeshare, I think something like 30% of my bonus was paid on my activity, 70% was paid on the target. And that made me continually review my activities. But look at this. If I show you actual budget performance, if I can say, look, we've overspent on the loyalty program, again, it just gives you some interesting information. Is it worth continuing with these activities, and so on? All right, so what I've described, I believe performance management, whatever we want to call it, CPM, BP, it doesn't matter. I believe the performance management is actually, it's a bit like driving down a car, okay? The business models that you build are like the engine, that mimic the engine working. I think the processes, planning, budgeting process, they're like the steering mechanism to make sure the engine's going the right place. I believe the strategy is the roadmap of where you want to head, and I believe the data that we collect is the fuel which keeps the engine going. Don't you just love those analogies? This one works really well, doesn't it? Is that right? Okay. And that's really what a CPM, a BPM system, this is what you can use the technology for in terms of developing this. Now, you never stop developing this. It is a continuous exercise that you do. So, finally then, next steps. I love this quote from Blackadder. If nothing else works, a total pig-headed unwillingness to look facts in the face will see us through. And I tend to sometimes relate this to, yeah, we know the budget doesn't really work, but let's do it anyway. So, again, I'm sorry I've operated at quite a high level here, but I want to give you 4 things that you might want to look at. First thing, just assess the role of planning inside your organisation. What role should it play? Should it be to keep the business operating? Should it be to implement strategy? And I would suggest it's both of those. What management processes need supporting? Come up with that diagram, that management process diagram inside your organisation, and start to challenge it with other people, saying, does this make sense? What areas are weak? What would be the value if they weren't weak? So that's step 1. Step 2, get senior management buy-in. In the end, it's senior managers who are going to make this happen. Again, I've worked with Rhine Data, and we can offer a one-day senior management workshop. In the workshop, that's quite a bit of fun. We actually pick a company that's failing, and we take it apart. Okay, we never take your company apart because that would be, I wouldn't last lunchtime. But out of it, we'll come up with a number of best practices, and then in the afternoon, we will typically say, okay, what is that? Let's translate that into what business models do you need as an organisation. And so it's a way of getting agreement and then kick-starting a plan up. Perhaps conduct an audit of the current planning reporting systems. How aligned are these things to strategy? Let's just, if they're not, let's just agree they're not, and take it from there. Step 3, people have always got to fix current pain points. But the important thing here is if you are looking, for example, to fix the budgeting process, you might say, well, I could never move to an activity-based budgeting process to begin with. That's okay. At the company I was at, it took us 4 years to move there. When we realised that our budgeting process was crap, what we did is we recognised it was crap, but let's, for the first year, we'll still play the budget game, but we'll take one strategic initiative out and we'll do that one properly. Then next year we'll take 2. And so over a period of 4 years, we gradually changed the focus of the company down to activity. And finally, start implementing an effective planning framework. Have that vision for what the planning framework should cover, and you'll find that technologies like SAP BPC are capable of doing these things. It's just that sometimes we tend to box them and say, no, it's got to be accounts, it's got to be about finance, or it's got to be about a dashboard, and we don't mix the two. No, it's about both, about working out. Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed that. Some suggested reading. Okay, we'll just give you the slides. Of course, I'll promote my own book first. But this one, Best Practices in Planning Performance Management, fantastic book. It's a survey of 2,500 companies, half of which are in Europe. Really interesting stuff. If everybody here has heard of Beyond Budgeting, they're the people who say they've abandoned the budgets. No, they haven't. They just do continuous budgeting. But again, so some great books there. This one, by the way, is the best book I've ever read on the balanced scorecard. Even though it says it's for government, it's not. It's for commercial organisations. Really interesting book. And finally, I run a blog. It's called the CPM blog, where I rant and rave about anything and everything in particular. It's got white papers on it, so if you're interested, do join that. I also write about radio control jet-powered helicopters. Just as a Okay, I think that's it. Thank you very much.